A very warm welcome to another live streaming council meeting. We're just going to get straight into the agenda items very shortly. Just in case you haven't watched one of these before, meetings are run by under standing orders, so there's rules about how we engage, and we'll be following those. Along the way, if we think there's needs to be extra information, then we'll try and give that as well so that people have an understanding. If you want to look at the agenda paper itself, it's available by going onto the council website and downloading it from there. We're scheduled to go through till 11:15. If we're finished the public part of our meeting before then, we'll just finish at that time. There will be a break, 15-minute break at 10:30. So there'll be a wee bit of a gap in the live stream at that stage. But anyway, otherwise, welcome, and also welcome to councillors and to staff and to the media as we get underway for this additional council meeting. I just need to advise our governance advisor that Councillor Holding isn't able to join at the moment. He needs to be sent another invite, I think, to allow him to join now. So we'll carry on with business. So first of all, just an apology for lateness for Councillor Holding. Do we have any other apologies? Right, okay.
Yes, we do, Mr. Mayor. Sorry, Councillor Ross McRoby is not here for the meeting. Thank you.
Thank you. So would someone like to move apologies be accepted? Councillor Hopkins, Councillor Tavendale, moved and seconded. Put that to the vote. Those in favour, please raise your hand. And those against, that's carried. Just move on to declarations of interest. So do we have anyone with a declaration? No, that's fine. That's just something we do just to make sure that if anyone's got a conflict with any item that's on the agenda, that they can let us all know that at the time. We now move on to confirmation of previous meeting minutes from the council meeting held on the 12th of May, just 2 weeks ago. Seems like a while ago now. Any comments on those? Right. So I'd like to move.
Happy to move. Yep.
Councillor Hopkins, Councillor Milmine. Thank you. No further discussion. Right, we'll put those in. So again, just a show of hands for those that in favour of them being accepted and against. That's carried. Thank you. All right, moving on to my reports on page 22 of the agenda. What I'd probably say there is, it's interesting when we have a meeting 2 weeks ago and then pretty much have to start writing this from that time, and but there's still a reasonable amount of activity that's going on behind the scenes, and so this is just an opportunity to update everyone on that. So I'll take it as read. It's covering off a number of different items. In addition to that, there's been response to the letter that I sent to the Prime Minister. I have actually got that updated in there, but that's been passed over to Minister Shane Jones, and we're waiting still for a response from him. Wearing my other hat as a member of the Local Government New Zealand National Council, we've got our annual meeting between National Council and the Cabinet on Thursday morning. So we'll be talking with them, and it's an opportunity really to share our thoughts on different items, and we'll be making the most of that. So any comments or questions from my report? Councillor Hopkins.
Yes, Mr. Chair, one question, one comment. Question first, page 27. Are you able to give us any more information about the two quite significant construction projects for large commercial buildings? I mean, I know these reports are written a few days in advance, so is there anything more you can tell us in the community about either of those?
Well, one is Trustpower's new office in 7th Street. So they're looking forward to getting that underway. There was a bit of demolition that had to happen. And the other is for another building out at the industrial park. So yeah, good to see some, another stage being taken up there. So yeah, it's all positive stuff as we're looking for more work and action in our economy. So good work.
Look, the other thing, just the comment, going back to page 26, you personally thank the Board of Tourism Waitaki, and I'll quote here from your report, for the work it has done to try to keep people employed, including making the decision early in the piece to cut their remuneration to zero. And that's the board's remuneration.
Yeah, I probably could have been clearer on that. Yeah.
No. Look, what I wanted to say was I think I personally, in the same way that the council endorsed your letter and supported your letter at the last meeting, I would like to move that the council thanks the board for its commitment and generosity in a difficult period. But I think it would be quite good to formally recognise this action by the board. So I so move.
Okay, well, very happy to take that motion. Do we have a seconder for that? Councillor Tavendale, thank you. Any discussion on that? Anyone want to make any other further comment? Councillor Tavendale?
Just totally support that. They've obviously been doing probably bigger hours and more work under a pretty high pressure situation. And on top of that, they've chosen to take no remuneration for it. So I think that's pretty amazing, and yeah, they're putting a lot of hours in.
Yeah, and as I know, there's certainly some of the members of the board are involved in tourism in other areas, and they're having a tough time there as well. So to be able to still dedicate time to Tourism Waitaki with no remuneration is particularly notable. So yeah, certainly acknowledge that. Right, well, we'll put that motion then. So those in favour, please raise your hand. And those against. That's good. And I'll personally convey that appreciation to the board. Right, any other comments from my report? Okay, well, someone like to, oh, sorry, Councillor Wolstein.
Yeah, just a quick comment, Mayor Gary, that your first paragraph on page 28 of the report, just saying that that's not all bad news. We could get caught up in the challenges and negativity of the pandemic, but there are plenty of good news stories around as well. So thank you for ending your report on a positive note, just to remind people the end of the world is not nigh. Thank you.
No, there's definitely positivity out there in different ways. It's certainly tough for a good number of people, and we're trying to acknowledge that, of course. But yeah, no, thank you very much. As we need to look at the positive things as well. All right. Okay, just check where I was at. So we need to put. Sorry, someone move. We adopt that. Councillor Milmine, thank you, and Councillor Wolstein. We'll get you next, Councillor Kingham. Right, those in favour, please raise your hand.
No.
And those against, and that is carried. Thank you very much. All right, we now move on to page 29, and the item being the Local Government Funding Agency membership. This report's been written by our Finance and Corporate Development Group Manager, Mr. Paul Hope. So welcome, Paul. Would you like to speak to the report?
Yes, thank you. So this is we have discussed membership of the Local Government Funding Agency in the past. The original intent was to do this as part of the next long-term plan process. That would have allowed sort of consultation along with the long-term plan and a review of the borrowing management and investment policy, and including all of the changes in sort of one go. However, circumstances have changed. It seems appropriate to try and join this organisation as quickly as possible. There's very clear benefits for membership for councils. We will be one of the last to join And the reason for that is this provides a very cost-effective source of funds to its member councils. So there's 3 recommendations. The key one and the key point in the first recommendation is the decision to join as a non-guaranteeing member. It's a slightly simpler process. The only drawback is there is a limit of $20 million of borrowing. That, and based on our assessment, that will certainly be sufficient for council's needs. So that's why we're recommending joining as a non-guarantee member. There is a small extra cost attached to it, but that's pretty immaterial given the amounts involved. The second is in relation to presenting a statement of proposal and a consultation plan if one gets passed to the next council meeting. Some advice, well, so we had a query after this report was prepared, and we just need to clarify whether, due to changes to the Local Government Act, whether a special consultative procedure is still required or it can be done as a simple consultation. I mean, the net effect will be pretty similar. It just means we might recommend we go out for 3 weeks rather than 4. So that's something that will be clarified in the next report. And in terms of changes to the liability management and investment policy, these are very much just focused on the changes needed to allow us to join. There are elected members have raised a number of other issues where they would like to discuss items in the policy. That would be possible. We could do sort of a quick review over the next week, but my preference is that we just keep this very simply focused on the LGFA requirements, so we won't really confuse the issue in the mind of the public when we're going out to talk to them. So that's really just my comments. I think the background sort of explains why this matter is sort of reasonably urgent, and really just happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much. Okay, so first up, we'll take questions. Does anyone have anything? Councillor Hopkins.
Paul, a couple of questions. One or two things about the policy that I'd like to just mention later, but looking at the information you've given us in the report, there's a reference here to the work we have to do with Simpson and Grierson, which involves appointments of trustees and a paying agent. So how many trustees are these trustees we have to appoint, or and how many, and what, if any, costs will be associated with that?
Yeah, there's a small ongoing cost. There's essentially 2 entities that act as trustees for virtually all the members. So they really act as an intermediary between the lenders and us to protect the lenders' interests. So it's just part of the joining and borrowing process. They're not individual trustees, they're organisations. So one is the public trust and the other is a corporate entity.
So we as joiners have to appoint them along, so they become our trustees when we join the fund. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, essentially.
Okay.
And the paying agent is, again, just an intermediary. Essentially, these are services provided by share registries. So they manage the individual pieces of debt and the funds flowing in and out.
Now, the other question was just on the next page, page 32, you quote a joint and several guarantee applies whereby all participating borrowers will be liable in the event of a default. Exception is if we borrow less than 20 million, it's not compulsory to participate in the guarantee, but it is limited to borrowing a maximum of 20 million from the LGF and will be charged an extra 0.1%. Is that in perpetuity? If we join as a non-guaranteeing member, are we committed to that forever, even if at some point later on we ask to change our status?
No, we can change the status going through it's just another engagement process, because there's a bit more disclosure information that we would need to provide. So, I mean, if we decide after 12 months that we actually want to become a guaranteeing member, then we could do that through the LTP. But at the moment, given the amounts we need to borrow, the recommendation is that we just go non-guaranteed.
No, I just wanted to know if the limit was there forever or only as long as we were non-guaranteeing. And I think you've told us that it's the latter, isn't it? Yes.
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you.
Councillor Wallstein.
Yes, just thank you, Paul, for your information provided. And just a comment, I support the joining the Local Government Funding Authority, but a question, Paul, you talk on here about the there is a requirement to contribute 2.5% of the total amount borrowed as capital, known as borrower notes. So I assume if council was to borrow money, does council receive 97.5% of the amount borrowed, and 2.5% is retained by LGFA as these borrower notes?
Yeah, effectively. Except it would work the other way. You'd add 2.5% onto the amount you want to.
Okay, yeah.
So we end up with the right net amount, yes.
Yes, thank you. And that amount, is there any return paid on those notes that are held by LGFA or?
No.
Okay, thank you, Paul.
Thank you. Any other questions? No. Okay. Someone like to move? Councillor Tavendale and Councillor Kingan. Moved and seconded. Or is that a question, Councillor Kingan?
Just in seconding the motion, there's 68 of the 72 local authorities have already joined this, which tells me something, but it also tells me something about the health of our finances. So that's a really positive thing. More than happy to second the motion.
Thank you very much. Yeah, it's certainly important to note that we are a net lender. We've got quite a bit of money loaned out, and being able to borrow in at a low rate and lend out at a higher rate is being quite good for the ratepayer, and certainly that's it's quite easy to support this on that basis. Councillor Tavendale.
Yeah, much the same thing. Obviously, our last meeting, we made the decision around the NOIC loan and extending the terms of that. And basically, this is a way of us holding over anything we still want to do, but we're actually still making an increase in the fact that we can get this money cheaper from the local government funding agencies than we're actually charging to lend it out. So it gets us in a good position ultimately.
Okay, any other comments? Right, well, we shall put that then. So those in favour of the three recommendations in the motion, please raise your hand. And those against? That's carried. Thank you very much. Now move on to...
Mayor Kuchar,
Yes?
is it possible, just very quickly, I know Paul said that he didn't want to have any consultation on the liability management and investment policy beyond the reference to the LGF. But reading it through, some of the references in here to property investments and on page 40 and 41 do to me raise issues as to whether we're even doing things at the moment in terms of what the policy stipulates. The references to quarterly reviews of property investments and other things of that nature. References to endowment properties accruing interest but never being capitalised, if you like, which appear to contradict other later references in the policy. I do think there are things here that should, in addition to the joining of the LGF, there are things that should be looked at and if necessary changed as well. Because in one or two instances and I'm not saying we are, but my reading of it would suggest that in one or two areas, what we're doing currently, practice is not following policy.
Right, I'll just ask Mr. Hope to comment on that. Got any comment?
Yeah, no, I think Councillor Hopkins raises a valid point, so we'll go through those with the property team. If there are things that are essentially corrections of fact or are truly out of date, then it would be advisable to correct those and present a compliant policy for consultation. So that's something we could look at over the next 2 weeks and bring a amended version as part of the consultation report.
No, thank you very much.
Thank
Okay,
you.
now we move to page 54, to the rates relief and support agenda item. Again, Mr. Hope, if you'd like to speak to that. And I'll also, after you've spoken, just ask whether Councillor Wallstein or Councillor Tavendale want to speak on it. It's two councillors have been working with you on this.
Yeah, thank you. So I think this is very much a starting point for a discussion. And really, I think the Deputy Mayor and Councillor Wallstein will probably add more value than I will. It's really taking a couple of approaches. One is to expand the current method we use for addressing sort of financial issues with ratepayers in terms of paying their rates, and that is putting in place payment plans. The key to those plans is really regular payments from as soon as an agreement is reached. The second matter is more of a postponement, which would allow no payments to occur for an agreed period of time, and then payments to be made after that. So similar approaches, but with a couple of key differences there. And then the other matters were raised in the original discussions, and then just, yeah, they're there for consideration and perhaps action at a later time. I think it'd be easier to go through probably the individual pieces once the two elected members have had a chance to speak.
Okay, I'll hand over to Colin and Mel. Got any comments you want to add there? Perhaps Councillor Wallstein, do you want to start on that?
Well, thank you, Mayor Kircher. Yes, we're along with Mr. Hope, Melanie, Deputy Mayor Melanie, and myself have worked on this policy. It's been a quite hard policy to actually come to a firm conclusions, but it's a matter really of giving council some ability to react to circumstances as they unfold. Because at this point in time, we know that COVID has caused a lot of financial distress for many businesses around town, and maybe some people, private people, have lost their jobs as well. But we don't know the details, and it's just a matter of giving council the ability to react to the demand that may eventuate. And I think Mr. Hope made the points very clearly that in terms of postponement, there is a problem with postponement in terms of the debt does not go away. It simply sits there and waits for another day, and that could well end up putting a ratepayer in further financial strife and time. Whereas a payment plan where payments being made right from the start does mean that the council is still receiving some money, the ratepayer is still making payments, and therefore the amount of debt is not increasing at an exponential rate. And the other matter was really to look at the penalties that are being charged. In the past, the penalties charged are quite a high level. So just to reduce those penalties down to a lower level, to recognise that people have a very good reason for not paying. So it's really a policy that is trying to provide options and to be flexible, to allow council to help ratepayers through this crisis in the next year or two. So thank you for the opportunity to comment.
Totally agree with everything Councillor Wallstein says. Essentially, we wanted to give our officers tools to have a bit of discretion around people that were struggling to pay their bills, but we're not wanting to dig people into a bigger hole. So the payment plan certainly was an option that we preferred to postponement, but we did wonder whether there could be opportunities for postponement if, say, a business that knew they were going to be able to pay it in a later date, or if someone was doing a house sale, that kind of thing. But they're very difficult to put into the actual policy. The other thing we wanted to discuss was the small business side of things, because we haven't allowed the payment plan kind of process on small businesses before, but we think that this is quite a unique time, and that's probably a portion of our community that have been really suffering and probably need that little bit of help. So if there's a way that we can make things a little bit easier on them to plan their bills and their cycles, especially with things like water payments and everything else that they have to pay on top of the base rates. So that was basically what we tried to achieve. And obviously there's a few questions a bit further on in the report just to change it around a wee bit and see what everyone's thoughts were on things like your Airbnb properties and other things. So I think that'll be helpful just to tweak it a little bit and get it sitting where everyone's comfortable. But yeah, thank you for Mr. Hope's work on this and Councillor Wallstein.
Yeah, thank you all. So first of all, any questions, councillors? Councillor Hopkins.
Yeah, look, just a couple for Paul, Melanie and Colin, and thank you very much for this. Really, I've got two questions. The first is on page 56. You're looking at the preferred options for relief and so forth. And what you say is there should be a number of conditions met before any specific relief is considered. And you go on to say what they are. The applicant can demonstrate they've applied for assistance elsewhere, have a good record. I was just wondering why you chose to make that compulsory rather than discretionary, because you also go on and say that it's a criteria that doesn't need to apply to the simplest of situations. So I'm just wondering why we don't just say council may require these things rather than must require them. I'm wondering why you chose must rather than may.
Yeah, Councillor Tavendale.
From my point of view, it was on the time frame. So essentially, if we were looking at what people were doing now, we didn't want to put a huge number of rules in to stop people coming to talk to us if they are in problems right now. So if we can work out that payment plan within the next 12 months, then we didn't want to put a whole lot of handbrakes on that. But in saying that, we're still aware that we didn't want it to be the first stop for people when they're having problems. We wanted them to, talk to their bank and budget advisors and that kind of thing. So people that were wanting a lot longer payment plan, we wanted to put a few more rules in place to make sure that they had done what they needed to do. But we also recognise, and I think the main thing is, it's better for people to call us early if they're having problems rather than to let it go on. So that wee rider in there was really to say, if we can do a short-term payment plan, then we're going to be a lot more lenient in how we go about that.
Well, yeah, I think you're saying the same thing I am. What I'm really saying is that if we exercise discretion to do it, but don't make it in every instance that people have to pass all those tests by way of filling in a form or something. But yeah.
Just ask Councillor Wallstein just to comment as well. You're on mute, Colin.
Question.
You're right now.
Yeah, I'm right now. So, yeah. Just in response to Jim's question, the first 2 points were really to ensure that council became a funder of last resort, that people didn't look at the council for their first ability to pay the rates, but to be the last ability. So if any ratepayer was able to find rates assistance from central government fund, or a homeowner to apply for the rates rebate, they had to show that they made those attempts first before they came to council, rather than coming to council as the first port of call. And the third point, Jim, was regarding a good payment record. We didn't want to actually allow somebody who was already in trouble or already in arrears to further extend their arrears. So that was only just digging a hole deeper, as Melanie mentioned before. So that makes
good sense. Yeah.
That was the reason why. And the last part was, people who are going to be able to only very short-term deferment and pay it off within 12 months. Well, then that's much simplified and wouldn't have to meet those criteria.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you for that.
The other question on page 57, we're looking at that. Option 2 was to have a commercial option be developed and added to the postponement policy, and then you outline it, and it's to provide small and medium-sized commercial ratepayers, I'm abbreviating slightly, to defer payments of all rates charged in the 2020-21 year for that rating year and allow them to be repaid over up to 2 years. And I suppose my question is, why didn't you go for allow them to be repaid over an agreed period? Why 2 years and only 2 years?
Well, I think the thing that the reason rationale for that was, once again, to make sure that these matters do not drag on too far into the future. But you'll note also there, Jim, if there is a without penalty, but with an annual postponement fee. So there'll be a fee charged, and that fee we have not decided upon, but there'll be a fee charge, which will be a fee which will be large enough to be a deterrent to people who just want to do that just as a matter of course.
Deputy Mayor.
We discussed quite a bit around 2 years or 3 years on this part of the policy, and we went for 2 years because we were trying to encourage that people still keep their payment plans happening. It's certainly not a die in a ditch for me, this one here, but I guess it's around, we can put an agreed amount of time, but in our policy, do we want to give people a bit more guidance in that and give our staff a bit more guidance? So it was probably trying to say, right, we can get our staff to pick figures out of the ear, or we can give them a guidance of where we're thinking, and that's something for them to work with. But yeah, certainly I think a bit of discretion is helpful, but
yes,
you know, and maybe you err on the side of caution and put 3 years with an intent that we probably want to make plans a lot earlier than that. So it's probably the 2 years probably sits better in a lot of ways.
But if I'm hearing you correctly, perhaps if the policy finally read to be repaid over 2 years or otherwise by agreement, something like that, for those exceptional circumstances.
Yeah, I'm really interested in seeing Mr. Hope's thoughts on that. I'm comfortable, but yeah, that's up for discussion, I guess.
Yeah, Mr. Hope, you're waiting there. Yep.
Yeah, I would have a very strong preference for a limit in the policy. Yeah, whether it's, and I wouldn't say you'd want to go any more than 3 years. This is, you know, even we're talking small and medium-sized entities. Their rates bills are, I mean, they're a significant expense for some of them, but they're not that huge. They should be able to be, you know, repaid, I would have thought, over a 3-year period. If it needs to be longer than that, we're going to have, I think, significant difficulties recovering it, because just the nature of the amount and its impact on the business. And if there's not a limit in the policy, then people will ask, I think, to push it out as long as possible in some circumstances. And it's easier for us to say, look, this is what we talked about. Here's the maximum. Let's try and actually work back from that and come up with something that works for both parties. You know, we don't want this debt sitting out there too long, because it does get harder and harder to collect the longer it's out there.
Councillor Wallstein.
Yes, the time period, we discussed at quite some length, and if you refer back to the recommendation number one does say up to a maximum of 3 years. But again, in our discussions, we moved between 2 and 3 years, and I think the feeling was that even though that recommendation one does say 3-year period, that council would try and encourage any ratepayer who was applying for relief under this policy to try and only work on a 2-year period rather than a 3-year period. So just rereading it again now, that recommendation one does say in a 3-year period, whereas further down to the clause that Councillor Hopkins raised, which relates more to commercial, is 2 years. So 2 years, as Mr. Hope said, 2 years was definitely the preferred maximum time period the council would try and work towards. So I think, you know, being commercial, and I think of that on the grounds that Mr. Hope's mentioned, I'm quite happy that it remained at just the 2-year period for the small commercial ratepayer.
Okay, thanks for that very full explanation, team. Councillor Newton.
Thank you. Just a question for potentially all of you, just in relation to the payment arrangements on page 57. You refer option 2. If you're going down the line of using option 2, would that not effectively be a postponement if you're extending up to 3 years, as you'll be accruing or compounding rates over that period as well? And I'm just wondering how that compounding rates would potentially be dealt with.
Deputy Mayor.
I guess that is what you talk about with the payment plan. So we're not deferring rates and putting them off. We are expecting that in that entire time, as well as what's outstanding, there is a payment of the rates that are happening. And so I'm guessing through the payment plan, they would be calculating the rates that were going to happen in that time as well and fitting them all together. So yeah, essentially you're not deferring the payment, you're still continuing payment on. It's just in a way that spreads it out and makes it manageable.
Thank you. Councillor Wallstein.
And just to, yeah, thank you, Mayor Kircher. To make a further comment regarding the penalties that are mentioned there, penalties normally would be remitted if the payment plan was adhered to from start to finish, and the rates in arrears were repaid as per the plan. If a ratepayer was to fall on the way through and not complete the plan, then normally those penalties would then be re-added to the amount owed and be charged. So just to make the point that there is a requirement that once a payment plan is entered into, that it must be adhered to and paid as per the plan.
Thank you. Councillor Nugent.
Yes, just wondering, would a maximum amount apply also to payment arrangements? So a total amount of rates due, if it fell over 3 years, of course you'd have potentially 2 years of rates being applied and a payment plan being in place. Would that be capped at all?
Well, thanks to respond, Councillor Newton. If you just looking further down just a bit of confusion of numbers at times. Page 57 on the iPad is actually page 58, numbered down below. So looking at the actual paper for the day, on page 57, the bottom of page 57, it does say, to further refine the policy, the following matters would need to be considered. So there are some matters there that have not been nailed down at this point in time. And the very first question there is, are there limits on the size of the rate account? And then, as Melanie mentioned before, in relation to, does it apply to farms, to residential rentals, Airbnb, or holiday homes? So there are some parts that have not been nailed down fully. And that point you raise is one of those points on the bottom of page 57 of the paper, or the top of page 58. So that would be where there is still some items to consider, or to leave council some discretion when they are considering an application.
Councillor Nugent again.
Yeah, sorry, I was just that was in reference to the payment arrangements, and obviously I read it quite differently because that was in relation to postponement versus payment arrangements, and whether that question is valid for payment arrangements as well is where I was coming from. Would that be correct? That those are still applicable for the payment arrangements?
Good point, Peter. Very good point. And but I think once again, it's a matter of the council executive staff who are looking at the applications would need to consider that. And I think in terms of the payment arrangements, we didn't actually put that criteria, that rider in there. The only one is really is above that the applicant must have a good previous payment record. And I think, and if an applicant had a previous good payment record, then council staff would be more likely to approve an application, even if the amount of rates was for a higher amount. But it's not. We did nail that point down in our paper.
I guess that also brings back to the discussion around small business when you talk about farms and that kind of thing, as to what we want to include and not include. And that was probably something we were looking for a bit of a steer around. because essentially that talks about the size of your business and how big do you want to make this. And obviously, the bigger the business that we're allowing these payment plans to happen for, the more risk there is for council around the level of rates that are out there not being collected. So yeah, so having a think on that, but obviously the COVID-19 stresses a lot of things like the small businesses or your Airbnbs may well be struggling like they haven't before. And I think we probably had the attitude before that a second house or an Airbnb hasn't been something that we would help out a lot because, you know, it's not their first residence, when now I think that's probably a little bit different in the fact that their income they may have had to cover that once before may not be there now. So these are the questions, I guess.
Yeah, I've just got a question. You do ask the question, can a tenant apply if they are liable for the rates? And I think that a lot of small businesses will be in that position. Many don't own their properties, they rent them. Personally, I mean, they are the people we're trying to help, but the flip side of that is that, that they'll be paying rent, often they'll be responsible for rates. So yes, they should be able to apply, but if the business folds, the landlord becomes responsible for unpaid rates. Has that been considered, and is that part of the process that would be to get approval from the landlord as well? Councillor Tavendale?
I think you hit the nail on the head in that last comment, that my thoughts would be that we can certainly offer that to the tenants, but it needs to be approved by the landlord so that they're aware of it, and also obviously no double dipping, that we're not having a landlord and a tenant try and apply for anything or anything going on like that. So yeah, I think that getting the approval of the landlord is probably the key in that.
Yeah. And Councillor Wallstein.
And just thank you, Mayor Kirch. It's a very good point. And I think in terms of normally a commercial lease, the tenant is responsible to pay the outgoings, which are the rates and insurances. But normally the rates bill should go to the property owner, and then the property owner will pass it on to the tenant. So which may not be the case in every case, but the tenant is responsible. But at the end of the day, if the tenant doesn't pay, then the landlord, the property owner, is responsible. So there needs to be a good matter of communication between the property owner and the tenant to ensure that the matter is dealt with in a proper manner.
Yeah, it's certainly when I was in retail, the rates bill came to me as a tenant. It's my name on that. So it doesn't. Yeah, it is making sure, I guess, as part of any application, that there is basically a contract entered into, and part of it will be, are you the person responsible for paying the rates? Would be part of that. But anyway, Mr. Hope.
Yeah, just really clarifying that. We would need the permission of the ratepayer, so that's the person on the rating information database. And in most cases now, that is the landlord or property owner. So it would be sort of a three-way agreement. It was really allowing a tenant to initiate that process, but you would certainly have agreement, a sort of a three-way agreement between council, the tenant, and the landowner, the property owner, before we put anything in place.
No, thanks very much. Councillor Hopkins.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor Kircher. Look, a question, but just before, a very quick comment. Hearing Paul say he could live with 3 years for commercial, and hearing Melanie say the same, I would argue that all payment arrangements should be up to a maximum of 3 years, including the commercial ones. But the thing, this leads me to the question, if we look at resolution number or recommendation number 3, we're asking the Performance Audit and Risk Committee to develop criteria for rates and to draft a commercially focused addition to the policy. What's the time frame for that? I believe we should have something in place, preferably by July 1. And will there be any public consultation or opportunity, even if it's relatively limited, for feedback? Because I would have thought, given potential gravity of the situation, that it might be quite nice to get some input from small businesses, the Airbnbs, agriculture, farms, et al., residential rentals and the like, before we lock it in place. So time frame and consultation? Will there be any?
Mr. Hope?
I think it's not possible to do that by 1 July. The key date is the date of the first instalment. So that's going to be 25 August, because people aren't required to make a payment before that date. So that gives us a bit more time. And it was certainly my intent, and I may not have communicated it to the Deputy Mayor or Councillor Wallstein, was there would be certainly an engagement exercise. And yeah, really with those, it would be quite targeted because it's really no harm to most people, but of great interest to specific groups. So I think we can engage with those specific groups, get feedback. So it actually will be a policy that meets the needs of those people who are going to be targeted by it. That we've had some independent views on it. So we're not going to create something with a number of unintended consequences, and really just gives it a wee bit of time to work it around, massage it, and come up with something that will actually be fit for purpose. So yes, there would be an engagement process, if a little limited, and quite targeted.
Thank you, Paul. Very happy with that answer. Thank you.
Thanks very much. And Councillor Newton.
Thank you. Just one question. The decision objective states that to produce a range of measures that will allow council to respond to cases of financial hardship caused by the impact of COVID-19 crisis on businesses and individuals, etc., etc. Is this policy intended to be for only the period in which we are in lockdown, or post that? Is it a policy that is in continuance, is I guess what I'm asking?
Well, my view on it is that the repercussions of what's happened over lockdown and what's going to continue happening in shutdown of tourism, all those sort of things are going to go on for some time. So I don't feel confident that I can put a time frame on this, but maybe it's something that through next year's annual plan, or is it a long-term plan, sorry, that we may revisit and say we want to continue this on, or we want to strengthen it back up to what it was with previous COVID-19. But at this stage, I think the repercussions are going to be, relatively long lasting, and we're probably not in a place that we can actually put a date on that yet. I'm not sure if everyone supports that or not.
Councillor Wallstein.
Yes, Peter, in response to Councillor Newton's question, yeah, our focus was definitely on the post-COVID-19 period, and looking out the next 2 or 3 years after that. We didn't really look into the long term, but just to make the point that a council policy such as this can be changed at any time. So this is a policy that's been put in place now to really deal with COVID-19, and in 2 or 3 or 4 years' time, once this is behind us and we're moving into back to normality, that's when council can decide to continue the policy or to amend it, or whatever may be the opinion of the council at that time.
It certainly would be an easy thing to add a recommendation that it gets reviewed annually, if that was the desire. So look, I think we've given the questions a pretty good go. Hopefully people got a good understanding of that. I do just want to point out that we currently have a system for people to be able to apply on a case-by-case basis, but the idea of the policy is to have an ongoing framework that staff can use, and they've got delegation from council to look after the people who really need it. And that it is a fairly unique situation we're in. We do get situations like this occasionally, but it is pretty rare, and certainly something that's like the pandemic itself is very rare. So it is making something that's fit for purpose, and we've got a wee bit of work still to do, just developing criteria. So if the recommendations are agreed to. So anyway, we'll look for a mover and seconder for those, Councillor Tavendale and Councillor Wallstein. moved and seconded. Anyone like to speak to that? Councillor Kingan?
Yeah, thanks guys for setting this up. I mean, it's set up with the intention of helping those that need it most during this period. And the criteria does have to be quite strict because we don't want it taken advantage of by those who see it as an opportunity that take advantage of it. It's got to be set up for those that need it most. So I support the motion.
Thank you. Anyone else wish to speak to that? Okay. Right, we'll put the motion. Is that including an annual review recommendation?
So point of order, Mayor Kircher, that would need to be a fifth recommendation, I think.
I'm just checking whether it was implied or not. Councillor Tambo.
I hadn't implied it, but I think it's probably something that through the long-term plan process gets revisited.
Okay. So are you happy just that it is that the policy gets reviewed annually through the annual plan process? Mr. Hope, you just want to comment on that?
I mean, these are essentially included in the rates resolution process. So there is sort of an annual review. Usually it's done very lightly. So there's certainly an opportunity to review it annually. It's really just, as it's been highlighted through this discussion, will certainly be done through the long-term plan. And I think as part of that process, they'll either be removed or modified, and then see how they're working in sort of 24 months' time.
With the support of the seconder, I'm happy to remove, to add at the end of number 1 there, to be reviewed annually into the recommendation, if that's got seconder support.
Councillor Wolfstein, are you happy with that?
Yeah, I actually don't think it's required, but I'm not opposed to it. Let's put it that way. So I'm happy for that to be added.
Yeah, I think it's one of those things that would happen anyway, but it just putting it in writing is comfort. Oh, yeah. Okay. Any further discussion? Right. We'll put that. So those in favour of the motion, please raise your hand. And against, and that's carried. Thank you very much, and again, thank you, councillors and Mr. Hope for working on that and bringing that to us. We now move on to page 61. And
Mayor Kircher, I'm happy to move all 3 recommendations. I mean, it's just pro forma, isn't it?
Yeah, so happy to take that, and Councillor Kingan seconded that. So essentially, yeah, this is dissolving the emergency committee. It was set up at the start of the level 4 lockdown, and because at that stage we weren't sure whether we were going to be able to meet remotely or not. That legislation came through pretty much at the same time, and so the emergency committee hasn't been needed, and that's probably been a very good thing, and we've all been able to be involved in the decision making along the way. So just anyone else want to speak to that? Councillor Kingan?
Oh, look, I'll just add to what you've already said, that I think we can be extremely grateful that we've and so lucky that we've got by so lightly, I guess.
Indeed. Councillor Wolfstein.
Yes, I'd like to echo Councillor Kingan's comments, but just to add, in relation to the powers given to the Chief Executive, Mr. Fergus Power, during the time, I note there's a report to come to Council in due course with any expenditure that he may have incurred over that period under the powers. So that would be look forward to that. Would be the closing of this matter. So I look forward to that in due course.
Yeah, do just have a quick question for Mr. Power on that. It says it'll come to a future council meeting. Do we have an idea of the time frame for that report?
Yes, it'll come to the next meeting of council. The net figure is $24,848. So it's not a large sum of money in the overall scheme of things, given the circumstances. but the detail will be prepared by the finance team and come to the next meeting of council.
Thank you. So about 1% of the 2.5 million you were given delegation for, so that's not too bad. So we'll look forward to that report. Right, any other comments, Councillor?
I move that councils get the other 99%.
Right, moving right along. Okay, no further discussion, so I'll put the motion. Those in favour, please raise your hand. And those against. And that's carried. Thank you for that. Right, next up is page 63, just looking to change the meeting schedule. So this has come about because of the unexpected gap due to lockdown and the changes and so forth. So is there a question, Deputy Mayor? Yep. Question for you.
Yeah, just totally support that, but the only question I have is around the executive committee meetings, which I see as being a little bit different. Obviously the other ones feed into the council meeting anyway. The executive committee has a different role that has to, I believe, continue. So I was surprised to see those meetings cancelled. There may well be a need for those meetings to continue in the future, and I guess between COVID-19 and things like performance review and that kind of thing coming through, I would imagine we're going to need the executive committee meetings to remain.
Yeah, I think there will be. I'll probably I'll ask the governance advisor just to comment on that, whether it's a case of needing to cancel what's there but fill in gaps. But anyway, hand over to you, to governance advisor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, we still have an executive committee scheduled for the 16th of June. So it was just a decision taken at the time by management in consultation with the mayor that we would just stop those meetings at that time, but we have left that one in, and there is likely to be another one in July. So we haven't cancelled all of them, and they will be called as they are required.
Councillor Wallstein.
Yeah, thank you, Ainsley, Governance Advisor. Can I just ask a clarification in terms of the meetings under COVID Alert Level 2, group meetings of up to 10 people are allowed. So the Executive Committee has a fewer number than that. So when is it expected that council meetings could resume face-to-face if there are less than 10 people who are attending the meeting?
Through you, Mr. Chair, there is the issue of microphones and a bit more technology to happen in the council chamber. So at this stage, we believe that that executive committee meeting that is scheduled for the 16th of June would be held in the chamber. But in terms of larger meetings, we need to get more technology sorted out. So there is a project team on that at the moment, and we're working across 3 functions to sort that, and we'll have more information on that shortly.
Thank you, Ainsley.
And hopefully those solutions will be procured locally, of course. Councillor Hopkins.
Look, yeah, I've got a couple of questions, but respectfully, I beg to differ. We don't have to have microphones in the chamber. We may choose to if we want to do live streaming as we're doing now. But much as many of us would like that to happen, if the option is to resume live meetings, then we can do that as of midday on Friday. You know, that will allow for groups up to 100. So any limitation on meetings will be determined by us. And I don't think it should be decided entirely and exclusively on the basis that microphones will or will not be available. I've just got a couple of questions. Obviously, this report was meant to go to the last meeting because the first page talks about meeting scheduled for today being the 12th of May. So I don't know why it's been delayed for a fortnight, but one of the things that does concern me, in addition to the executive committee not being scheduled, I'm worried that the Performance Audit and Risk Committee isn't meeting until the 28th of July. And I wonder why that's the case. I believe that should happen sooner. I have another question regarding workshops in a minute, but is there an answer to that one?
Would you like me to answer that one, Mr. Mayor?
Yep. Yes, please.
Okay. So the mayor and chairs met and decided which ones would need to be cancelled at this point. Initially, the decision was for the meetings in late April, May and June would be cancelled, so that there could be all papers would go directly to council. It was just a let's keep it simple, let's keep it focused. And then there was a subsequent decision by that group in consultation with management that it would be extended through to July, and we would schedule another additional council meeting on the 21st of July, and we would leave in the performance audit and risk meeting that is scheduled on the 28th. One of the key points that was made is that we don't want to completely redo the whole schedule. So we're trying to link back in now to the existing schedule.
Yeah, that's fine. But look, we've just voted that the Performance Audit and Risk Committee will prepare a commercial policy, a commercial extension to the rates remissions policy. And Paul has said that he wants to have that in place by the time that people make their first payments in August, with some period for selective consultation. Now, I can't see how that can happen if the PAR committee doesn't meet till the 28th of July. I believe it needs to meet sooner.
That sort of thing doesn't happen in a formal meeting. It would happen in a workshop, and there's certainly.
Okay, right. No, that's fine. All right. So that's good. So workshops are exempt from this. That's fine. I'll stop there then. That's fine.
And just to, if I may, through you, Mr. Chair, I just want to reiterate that meetings can be convened at any time. If there is an item of business that is required, then they will be. Right. It's just there was a blanket policy put in place so that we could do that just to address it. We have to deal with public notifications, so we just wanted to make sure that we had the option. So they can be convened at any time, and the clock is about to strike, so I'm just going on to mute again.
No, thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Tavendale.
I was just going to move the recommendation, but just add a number 3 with amendments, just recognising that despite paperwork saying otherwise, that we will be doing the executive committee meeting.
Yeah. Perhaps with additions as necessary in the future. So if you're happy with that wording.
I'd second that. I'd second that. Yeah.
Thank you very much. So moved Deputy Mayor Tavendale and seconded Councillor Hopkins. Any further discussion? I'll just say, it's important that we do have good process, and we are doing the job that we need to do, that we're getting the reports coming through to us, and whether it's through to the particular council committees or to council, where we all get to see them. So that's important, and the transparency with the public is important. And really one of the reasons around looking for a good setup with microphones and so forth is to actually carry on the transparency that we're having at the moment, with people being able to live stream, watch this, and not have to come into the council chamber to see what happens at a meeting. So anyway, we've got the motion in front of us, so I'm going to put that now. So those in favour of that being adopted, please raise your hand. And those against, and that's carried. I'll just note too that at the moment we still don't have Councillor Holding joining us. Due to technical issues around the live streaming, it's been a problem. He is watching us though, I can let you know that. So he's with us in spirit. So hi Jeremy, and hope you're enjoying the live stream and relaxing. Right.
Is there a way that, I mean, maybe with two chairs in a single room, maybe Councillor Holding could share a space with our governance advisor or someone else? Is Mr. Hope in his office?
Yep, that would definitely be an option. So we'll, he may, if he's hearing that now, then Mr. Hope would be very happy to have a buddy there, socially distanced. But yeah, we'll be taking a break shortly as well to make sure that we communicate that depending on how timing goes. So thank you, councillors. Right, moving on to page 66 now, and the update from the our economic development manager, Mr. Quinn. Greetings.
Good morning, Fluffalover.
So would you like to introduce your report?
Yes, thank you. Presuming it's taken as read with any questions to come. If an update on the situation, we're continuing to engage with all the prime contributing sectors to the economy around the district. We have a belief that the peak unemployment will occur probably in mid-August. The interesting thing about a lot of the sectors and businesses in the district, there's a high degree of what we're calling the social contract, which is employers saying that rather than make early decisions on releasing staff, they will be trying their best to make sure that these staff are employed through the crisis. The Emergency Operations Centre of the CDM was stood down on Monday the 25th, so some of the business now comes back into council to perform as a council function. I've ordered data such as credit card spend information, including a benchmark prior to COVID, so that we can get a thermostat into which sectors are recovering at which rate in terms of spend. Continue to work with the Otago Regional Council on a model for impacting by district, but at the same time we are looking to the future, so there is some good things at the moment happening. We've been approached by NZT in Hong Kong looking for a company to be able to establish a canning factory in the district related to meat supply. We just announced yesterday a third Waitaki engineering company has received a PGF money to purchase new equipment. We have one more manufacturing company application in with PGF at the moment, and two more engineering applications are likely to be submitted. We have just received a report from the Otago Regional Council on climate change impacts for the districts in Otago, particular relevance to our primary sector focus group. We'll be sharing that with them and getting their feedback. We've been working with the Geopark Trust as well in terms of repositioning them in response to COVID, looking at a very much more community-based organisation which leaves a legacy of the Waitaki landscape and could also capitalise on the budget initiatives announced around nature-based employment. In terms of our communications function, our social media channel continues to maintain a high degree of engagement, which means that not only are people just opening and reading things, they are forwarding them, commenting, actually engaging with the content. Our comms team are also supporting various visitation initiatives, for example, magazine articles on the business recovery prospects of the Waitaki district, and campaigns we'll be working on with organisations such as the New Zealand Motor Caravan Association to bring visitors to Waitaki as soon as possible. We're also looking to develop a dashboard for the district, and that's both a short-term and long-term dashboard talking about not only the economic indicators of performance for the district, but also in a well-being sense, what's important to our community going forward.
Thank you very much for that. And just to mention the Motor Caravan Association, we've obviously got Oamaru as a motor caravan friendly town. I think there is a good opportunity to be pushing for Palmerston to get the same. We've now got a dump station there, which is one of the requirements, and also looking at whether there's opportunities potentially for a Marama would be the other one that would perhaps fit into the category. So yeah, I'm not too sure whether that's a work stream that can be undertaken shortly, but something that we probably need to think of and look at that opportunity as part of our domestic tourism campaign. Councillor King, put your hand up there.
Yeah, thanks, Jared. I've got a couple of questions for you, and they're probably a little bit outside your report, but you have touched on them in your preamble. Unemployment figures in the district, can you give us an update as to where they're at? And you talked that probably in August they'll they'll peak.
Yes,
And my other question is around, how are you finding things out there on the ground with regard to small businesses in our district? Just a general feeling of their health.
Okay, so for unemployment figures, they only come out monthly because we did want to try and get weekly figures, but they only come out monthly so that they can be reviewed by government departments and be considered accurate. So I can find out for you, Bill, and send to all councils the latest unemployment figures. I don't have them at my fingertips in that respect because they are over a month old. Small businesses generally trying to remain optimistic and are looking forward, obviously, to level 1. The hospitality and visitor-related industries are obviously well hit, and many are considering what they do, or in fact, if they continue to operate, and that's probably the biggest hit. The other sectors are remaining reasonably confident. We're talking to the production in, say, meat processing to get an idea of will their production output be affected. It has been by the distancing requirements, but we are hopeful that we're looking at a relief of those conditions from central government anyway. So look, overall, I think we're going to have to accept business fatalities in the tourism and hospitality sector. The ability of local residents to enjoy, say, a range of restaurants is underpinned by the fact that visitors come and use them as well. So without those visitors, even our local hospitality provision is compromised. So I think that's where we're going to see the hurt and pain.
Thank you. Councillor Hopkins.
Jared, thank you very much for that. Look, a couple of questions. Can you tell us any more about this canning plant that you mentioned a little minutes or two ago?
I prefer not to in terms of commercial and confidence information. There is a Taiwanese-based company that uses a lot of meat products and wants this produced in New Zealand and then exported to Asian markets. So we have a positive lead. What we're trying to see now is, do we have the actual capability established here in the district to fulfill serving up the amount of product that the company requires?
So it's not locked in place yet. They're looking at locations, and we're one of the possible ones.
No, it's not locked in place, but the interesting thing is that the world is turning its gaze. We can give you another example, again, without getting into detail, where a local company received product from the UK and distributed it around New Zealand. That UK company is saying that due to their changed approach to their size of operations in Europe, they may offer licenses to the Waitaki company to produce goods which now could serve the New Zealand and Australian markets. So people are changing their views all the time, and it's up to us to put our best foot forward and say, yeah, we can deliver.
Absolutely. Sorry.
Yeah, carry on, Councillor Hopkins.
Look, very quick question. You mentioned the Geopark Trust. Somebody was asking, a ratepayer asked me the other day, whether the shop is still to open. Is it? And if it is, can it perhaps service wider tourism interests with information and so on, or would it be specific to Geopark should it actually open?
Sorry, I missed the slightly warbled with there, Jim. I think you're talking about the Geopark pop-up shop, is it, on the main street?
Yes, correct. Yes. Is it still planned to open? And if it is, could it offer the pamphlets and some information about a wider range of tourism offerings? This was a question I was asked by a ratepayer.
The date for it to reopen is dependent on social distancing, because it's quite a narrow premise in the ability to keep people separated. And I think that there would be a range of options which should properly be considered by the current tourism organisations that are involved in their discussions at the moment.
Thank you. Thank you.
I guess in some ways, I mean, it's the Geopark is an umbrella for so many attractions, and there's part of the appeal of it is a lot of things can be promoted under that, and there is definitely a good opportunity. hopefully that can occur sooner rather than later.
Well, I think there's a high degree of collaboration going on at the moment. The Geopark Trust dealing with talking to other tourism-related business because of that, but also a number of groups, so the Chambers of Commerce, the Omri Business Collective, groups further up the district that are very open and very collaborative to trying to find a way forward out of this.
Okay, any other questions, councillors? Okay, right, well, so I'd like to move that we receive the information.
So move.
Hopkins and Councillor Kingham seconded that. So again, show of hands, those in favour and those against. And that is carried. And I managed to close this, but I'm pretty sure that brings us to the end of the public part of our agenda. So that's the end of this live streaming part. So I just need someone to move that we go into public excluded. Councillor Newton, and seconded Councillor Wallstein. Those in favour, please say aye. Sorry, raise your hands. Old habits. And those against. Right, so to members of the public who are watching this, either live stream or after the fact, thank you very much for joining us, and hopefully it's given you a bit of an insight into what we're doing and some of the business that we carry out in council. And thank you very much. I wish you all the very best for the rest of the week.